In the world of literature, we have many famous and influential masterpieces coming from different directions, beginning from the ancient Greeks to Shakespeare, and all throughout our history. Now modern literature has become an ever-before-seen universal phenomenon. When we mention the popular and influential literature of current trends, everyone must be familiar with J.R.R. Tolkien's work, or for easier recognition, author of The Lord of the Rings. His life has started in 1892, when an English couple living in South Africa gave birth to the famous J.R.R. Tolkien. After his father's death 4 years later, Tolkien's family moved to England. Unfortunately, when he turned 12, his mother passed away, leaving him and his younger brother to the church care. Later, the boys were adopted by their aunt, which they spent quite a miserable life. When Tolkien turned 18, he had attended King Edward's School in Birmingham, where he demonstrated his remarkable linguistic gift and strong desire for creating a new language. He also started his very first poem in this period. His inspiration was writing for a girl his age. Many years later, when he graduated from Oxford in 1915, he was enlisted into World War I Army. Before he was sent into the front line, he had married a girl, Edith Pratt, whom he had wrote the love poem for. After the war passed, he began his first work as a lexicographer. His language of elves and the myth of humans, dwarfs, and other creatures were created during this time. Later on, he returned to Oxford as an English professor in the linguistic field. One day, he was inspired by a quote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," from one of his students' note. Curious of what exactly was a hobbit, he began to build a story of a little creature called the Hobbit, living under the ground in a world called Middle-earth, which was based upon his previous tale. The publication of the book in 1937 stunned many people in England, for they demanded a sequel. By around 1945, Tolkien had finished writing, yet unpublished, The Lord of the Rings. The books were divided into a trilogy: The Fellowship of the Rings, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. However, the reaction of the books from the public were neutral. His death in 1973 did not mark an end to his legacy. After his death, his son gathered all of his works, both finished and unfinished, and published it. It could be said that his works became famous after this period. Consequently, for about 60 years, Tolkien's works sold more than 100 million copies worldwide, and being translated into more than 30 languages.
His famous masterpieces of The Hobbits and The Lord of the Rings. A brief summary of The Hobbits. It starts with an adventure of a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, who discovers his abilities while he's on a journey with Gandalf and his crew. Smaug the dragon took all the town's treasures, and while Bilbo tries to take it back, he finds a magic ring inside a cave. A brief summary of The Lord of the Rings trilogy. All of J.R.R. Tolkien's stories takes place in the imaginary world of Arda. However, the history of Arda and the Earth share many similarities and can be conveyed in one way, that the world that we live in is Arda, but as a newer version. Not only did Tolkien have a talent in creating splendid works and his magic touch in literature, but he also took his work to a transcendent level of coining a new language. Tolkien had great interest in the languages and considered it a form of art. As he quotes, "Language creation was an art all on its own, enhanced and enriched by the stories." inferring that languages came first, followed by stories that later gave them a home. Prior to his thoughts, he took no hesitation for creating his new language containing alphabets, which were called Tengwar or Fëanorian letters. It is the most common form that appears on his works. It is known that Tengwar letters resemble the Tibetan language by its grammar. These letters are divided into two types, Kenya and Sindarin. Kenya is used for high elves, elves that are in higher positions, and Sindarin is used for the gray elves. Kenya is inspired from Finnish, partially on Greek and Latin. Sindarin is based mainly on Welsh. Out of all the languages that he had constructed, the Elvish language is the most well-known. He worked on this language until his death. He had invented the vocabulary and the grammar for different dialects of the characters, also inventing numerals.
Tolkien's literature has never prospered as widely as in the current period, with technology and globalization as a tool for maintaining his works throughout the world. Pop culture has been a big influence spreading out his name. What is pop culture, and how exactly does it drive Tolkien's works? What is a pop culture? Pop culture is abbreviated from the word popular culture. For its dictionary meaning, it means the cultural phenomenon that facilitates the definition of the words on the internet. Pop culture defines the culture that are well known to people, such as media, music, and books, could be said as pop culture. We have interviewed an audience or readers of Tolkien's writings from different ranges of age, and these are the ideas that are shared.
I'm familiar with his scholarship, but not his novels. I haven't read the fantasy novels, but when I was in graduate school, I read his work on Anglo-Saxon and medieval English literature, his translations of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, The Pearl, and then just last month I read his translation of Beowulf, which was just recently released, though it was completed in 1926. It was published. But of the novels, no, I didn't particularly like fantasy. I did see the movies, Lord of the Rings. They're entertaining, but it didn't stimulate me to want to read the novels. Well, nowadays, I don't know. I know that his work first became popular in the 1960s among the younger generations with the work of Tolkien, the work of Hermann Hesse, and the work of Kurt Vonnegut. These were the three authors that even people who didn't read had to read because of peer pressure. It's like kids reading comics today. You know, they share the comics that they read, and people talk about Doraemon because they read it in primary school. Well, college students back in the 60s and 70s read Tolkien along with Hesse and Vonnegut out of peer pressure. Even business majors who didn't read knew these works. Recently, because of the movies, Tolkien has achieved a worldwide fame beyond England and the United States because of the movies. And maybe some of those people have also read the work, but I have no idea of the extent of the readership. The viewership is wide, the readership is probably still fairly narrow. So in terms of effects on contemporary pop culture, I really don't know what people, I'm not a reader of fantasy. I enjoy movies occasionally, but not too much. It's a minor genre to me.
While they were deeply influenced by his work, Tolkien's work is widely recognized by his style of writing. He has set out the setting so well and the characters as well, so that the readers would get stuck into his kingdom of languages. Apart from the critical thought of the modern generations, The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits has become extremely popularized in practical life, in objects from small crafts to architectural models. One popularized point is the themes, scenes, and story outlines shared in countless video games. Additionally, some people are even motivated by it to get a fantasy creature permanently inked onto their bodies. Besides the video games, wearing costumes as characters to go to cosplay conventions or events that are being held throughout are also another common activity. Many quotes from Tolkien's writings have been popularized among today's youth, such as, "All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost." Many people that relate to Tolkien's writing go as far as tattooing words and quotes of Tolkien's onto them. Many more quotes from Tolkien have inspired different people in encouraging positive perspectives and deeds. Others may include constructing houses or buildings modeled on the same structures as in the films, or even some small detailed and fun-to-do ideas like decorating cakes. In addition, the works of Tolkien has inspired other authors to start publishing books and trying to become successful by grabbing his plots and conducting them into newer products. J.R.R. Tolkien could be called as father of modern fantasy literature writer. J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter series, George R.R. Martin from Game of Thrones, and Star Wars were all influenced by Tolkien's writing. What could possibly explain the connections between all of that? Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Game of Thrones all contain fantasy creatures like elves, dwarfs, mysterious creatures, and fantasy sources that we can see in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. J.R.R. Tolkien has left us with a legacy that the world cannot disregard. His passion towards literature has definitely created a world masterpiece for our generation. The next generations forward, henceforth creating an interesting notion to modern and future literature.